My task today is to explore how aggression can be learned through social learning by summarizing and critiquing this particular study. Increasing amount of literature has linked media violence to relational and physical aggression. Previous studying on this topic has mostly been conducted on early childhood or primary age students. In fact, a 2012 meta-analysis indicated only 9 relevant studies for adolescents age bracket. Hence, the authors are extending this longitudinal study, previously led by Muller and colleagues, to further examine the efficacy of school-based intervention program on reducing media violence and aggression over a 3-year period. The study aims to evaluate the sustained efficacy of media violence intervention program on reducing adolescents' violent media use, normative acceptance, and aggression. The 3 hypotheses proposed in this study is that participants in the intervention program will show 1. Lower level of violent media use, and 2. Reduction of media violence than participants in the control group at the post-intervention measurement of T2, which will be sustained at T3 and T4. The third hypothesis predicts lower level of normative acceptance of aggression at T3 follow-up, which will be linked to lower level of aggression both at T3 and T4. Participants are 80% German, the remaining 20% are of migration background. I believe this large sample size gives strength to the credibility. The samples are originally from the Muller study. In line with the German regulations, parental consent was sought for participants under the age of 14. Although the authors did not mention, I will critique that this is a potential weakness in sample filtration. As this intervention program comes with the expectation of parental involvement, parents who are less involved in child's education will be less inclined to give consent. Parents can also refuse consent if they're aware of excessive violent media use or aggression at home, and understandably would not want this exposed at school. Germany has a 3-tier secondary school system which caters for students of different academic abilities and social orientation after primary years. The authors sourced 38 classes from 10 different schools, or 3 of the 3 above types of different schools, to represent students of various ability and socio-economic ranking in society. I think this sample diversity strengthens the results as well, because it's very representative of society. The intervention consisted of 5 weekly sessions and 2 parents' evening at the beginning and the end of the program. The first meeting informed parents about the potential harmful effect of exposure of violent media, provided guidelines on sensible media diet, and enlisted their support for media-free weekends. The researchers, however, did not register attendance and therefore cannot report on the percentage of parental attendance. I think this lack of attendance record is a weakness in the accountability. However, all students took supplementary materials home. The student curriculum addressed 2 main areas, which were 90 minutes each session. The restricted consuming module consisted of 1 week diary of daily media use, recording everyday media diet, raised awareness of problematic violence exposure. On weekends, participants are asked to not use media at all. Alternative leisure activities and strategies were taught in class to help students cut down the use of screen time. Here you see a sample of the homework that is set to reduce media violent consumption. In the critical consumption module, they seek to increase the participants' awareness of the different forms of violence by presenting clips that showed atypical and less obvious forms of violence. Students learn to recognize characteristic ways in which violence is portrayed in the media. Short-term mechanisms, such as primary aggressive thoughts and feeling, were illustrated in the demonstration, and long-term mechanisms, such as desensitization or learning processes, were linked to personal experiences. On the right is a sample of such intervention material. Participants also actively rehearsed and performed a scene that dealt with conflict with peers or parents. This group performance was then filmed and presented to the parents at the second parental evening. They first looked at the baseline measurement of exposure to media violence, normative belief about aggression, and self-reported aggression behavior at T1. Participants were then assigned to an intervention or a control group on class basis. For each intervention class, a comparison class was randomly selected from the same school and same year cohort. Once control group completed their measures, they did not receive any treatment. The intervention began 3 months after the baseline assessment. T2 was 7 months later, T3 was another 12 months later, and finally T4 was 24 months later. So post-intervention periods spanned a total of 30 months. At each wave, researchers measured the use of violent and non-violent media by frequency which participants reported the use of various genres. Normative acceptance of aggression was measured by asking participants to imagine a vignette of a provocative scenario and ask how acceptable various responses were. Aggressive behavior was measured by a 10-item self-report instrument, half addressed to physical violence and half addressed to relational aggression. A major weakness here is the reliance on self-report on all three parameters, which can be susceptible to social desirability. The graph shows media violence use at T3, T2, and T4, and self-reported physical aggression at T3 was significantly lower in the intervention group. And the indirect path from the intervention to T3 aggression via T2 media violence use was significant. Lower T2 media violence use predicted lower T3 normative acceptance of aggression amongst participants with lower initial aggression. Strong correlation across all parameters strengthened this finding. In conclusion, this study affirms the sustained effect of an intervention designed to decrease media violence use, which reduces the normative acceptance of aggression and physically aggressive behavior. The observed difference between intervention and control group provide further evidence to support that media violence is a risk factor for aggressive behavior. In the non-treated control group, post-intervention level of media violence use were higher. The higher media violence use predicted higher aggression another year later. These patterns are in line with previous longitudinal studies in adolescents. The implication ranges from future research directions, education curriculum to policies and guidelines regarding media broadcasting. It strengthens the link between media violence to adolescent aggression and shows policymakers, educators, and parents the necessity to condemn media normalizing beliefs. Lastly, the duration of this study proves great strength in the longevity effect of media violence on desensitization and social learning.